Right, this is going to be another episode of ReScope with me and Paladin here, who is available if someone's watching to be hired for tournaments and so on. Obviously, people see him sometime on the watch parties with me. Right, we're going to start off as usual. We do 3 topics each and we alternate between them. So we'll do yours first, Paladin. What is your first topic?
Yeah, I mean, I started my YouTube channel talking about support players, and they've always been a very enigmatic concept of Counter-Strike because stats never really jumped off the page for these players for a long period of time. And I think the narrative has definitely shifted as of right now. I mean, you look at players like Shush, Inters, Perfecto. I think the narrative on them has genuinely changed when, Inters was dropped by C9. I think most people were pretty upset about the move, whereas in previous situations, people were pushing for that supportive element to move back and get just more firepower. And I guess that just brings me to the question, what is the mark of a world-class support player in such a way that we can give players later back in history that don't necessarily fit the mold as of right now, their flowers? So i.e. players like NBK, Crims, Taco, Edward, Neo. I mean, these players don't necessarily fit the same shell as Shush, Inters, or Perfecto do right now, but they still were world-class support players. So what can we actually do to lump them into the same category of players, and how do we give them their credit?
Okay. By the way, I have a quick question because I thought we'd just do this live, right?
Yeah.
For these ones, normally we just do like a big rant each. But if you want, we could just do like point for point if you want. Because on one like this, I don't want to take all your points. I'm sure we have some similar ones. How about I make a point?
Yeah, for
You make
sure.
a point. We'll go like that on this one. Some of the other ones we'll do the usual start star one. So I thought the first thing immediately, because it just seems like an obvious one, there's a lot to unpack there, is to me, when I think of the structure of a team, because I do think like essentially, I'll give the quick analogy. One of the reasons why I do think people who just worship Michael Jordan and think he was like the best basketball player, I also would probably agree, but mistake that for he's the reason for all the team success, is for me what was genius actually about the way Phil Jackson worked in his teams, including the ones without Michael Jordan, was it's like he understood that the star player is sort of playing their own game in a way, and you give them the space and the resources, and then to some degree you aren't choosing what they do, you aren't drawing up the plays, their genius creates it. But what you try to do with the star player is the way you get him to buy in to some degree is you sort of tell him, oh no, the system isn't for you. Like, you're just going to work within the system and do what you want. The system's for the others, though. That's how I get the rest of the team set up so that we have a coherent plan. And also, quite frankly, that I can also then inform them how to help you instead of them just sort of standing on that side of the court and watching you do something crazy through the legs and do a 360 dunk. Like, they didn't help you with that. They don't even know how to help you with that. They don't even know what you're going to do. So I would say the first immediate defining quality to me, even though it's going to sound like a cliche, but it's because it's a well-worn premise, is they make other players better on the team. So actually already you'll notice that will never show up on the stats. Like sure, to some degree, if it's with like utility, maybe it will. You'll see opponents flashed, or maybe if they're in a support an entry play, maybe they're flashed more than everyone. There are some stats it might start to creep into, but I would say this is where players like the concept I'll throw in again, people who create space or anchor a site. Like essentially your stats, I'll use the old line since you mentioned NBK. I always used to tell Happy, both on the broadcast and to his motherfucking face, mate, some of your stats are just NBK's stats. Like what happens is when they run into the B site on Inferno, where him and NBK famously played in LDLC and Envious, and you clean them all up, that's because they're looking at NBK, who's on the site, who's at the boxes, the coffins. He's the one who's pushed up, and then you come out and bait him and get the kills. So look, you had to get the kills. Like blame F, like, yeah, you're getting the kills, mate. You're the one doing it with your skill. But it's not just that, is it? Like you are playing off someone, but his stat is not going to be there. In fact, he's going to die, and the kills are going to go to you. So if anything, a player will look at the box score and go, this Happy guy's great. Get this NBK guy the fuck out of there. And it's like, no, even the Happy guy you'd hope would understand. The NBK guy is actually doing something that makes him look better. So I would say that's where I'd start. There's one factor for me. What about you?
Yeah, I think there are other examples as well. I mean, you think about, the modern day example, I think, is obviously Inters and Shiro. I think that Inters did so much in terms of kind of post-plant scenarios where they'd be in 2v2s, 2v3s, where Inters would literally just run out and die in these post-plants just to give Shiro all the possible information, and then Shiro knocks it down because he just believes so much in his teammate that once he has all the information, he can actually get the job done. But I think you go back a little bit more, Taco with Cold. I think Cold Zera never looked as good as he did unless he had Taco with him, I mean, there was so much support that he would put in. I mean, in terms of utility, but in terms of space created as well. I mean, you can't have those iconic clutches from Cold without Taco. So I think he's done a lot of work for him in that regard. I think the other thing is that just the willingness to actually fill in those roles. I think there are a lot of teams in previously in history weren't necessarily willing to take up those roles. I think about like Crims on Fnatic. I think personally he wasn't necessarily the star player. I mean, he was putting up numbers for sure for a long time, but there was other players that could definitely put up those numbers. That were more in the spotlight. In Olaf, JW, Flesher, these guys were the playmakers. But Crims was always that stable rock that was able to provide space for all these players to get the job done. But in a roster like that has so many egos and so many ideas flowing. I mean, you got to have one of those players that is willing to take the brunt of the damage and take the shittier roles. And I know that sounds very obvious, but I mean, in a lot of these teams, I mean, even in FaZe, players like Olaf Meister, who was formerly a star in his own right, had to then take a check in the ego department and realize that, look, there's no way that we're going to win on a team with Nico, Guardian, and Rain, even in certain scenarios, to just take over games and have me put into those roles as well. Like he needed to take a step back and actually soak things in and be a bullet sponge of sorts to get space for some of those players. So I think just the willingness to actually fill in some of those garbage roles. I mean, those garbage anchor roles, dying first and opening doors for information. Those roles that a lot of these star players will never touch ever. That I think what was a big proponent for me is just that willingness to actually take those roles in the first place.
Another one for me, and I'll actually relate it to like if people know games like Dota and League MOBAs, where you have more set structure as to like which side of who you're giving the resources to, who's going to carry the game. You always know from the draft who's essentially meant to be the carry and who's sort of filling out the rest of the squad. And I do think this actually shows you why the exceptional support players sometimes feel like they're stars in their own right. And it's the concept of being able to lose gracefully. Like everyone must know by now, the most famous example ever is if you are the B site anchor on Mirage, you are going to get your fucking head smashed in constantly, or just be in impossible rotations on the other site that you're just not going to win. And you're just going to be like hanging around getting an exit or whatever. Like if you're the guy left on his own because the other players pushed up short, or he's already through the market area heading to the other site, if they come out of that upper area, they already have headshot angle on you, and there's going to be 2 or 3 people there. They're going to flash you off. They're going to have an AWP trained in on you, a second rifle on the right. Like people know that is one of the hardest positions in the whole game. There's a reason why, by the way, you never put like your Nikos of the world there. Even when the people like Simple swap there, you do it only as a surprise. You do it as like a gambit, essentially, to just throw them off and make them think twice. You never actually place a player there, because the perception is, even the best player in the world, it would be a waste of time. Because essentially, why would you want the best player in the world going like 1-on-2, 1-on-3 constantly? Like even Simple can't win those battles consistently. It would be impossible ask. So that's at the top level. That's why when you have a Valde, an NBK, a Crims, a Zipnix, that's why when they can do that role and then still have like good numbers, or actually like become famous for playing a spot, they are OP. But they're only OP if you have the rest of the team structure. So I would just say on the back end of it, this is where I think Inters went incredibly underrated. This is a concept from League where classically in League of Legends, it's the top laner, right? Just traditionally, it's a harder role to be the carry out of. The team has to play around you in a way that's very different, because when you get to the team fights, the mid and the ADC tend to be the ones that clean up the team fight. So basically, traditionally, the top laner in League of Legends tends to be more like the one where he's just not going to get the attention that the mid laner and the AD carry do. His lane's the one that's just going to be like, no help from the jungle as much, or they're just going to give him a crap champion, or he has to pick his to fill out the draft. And basically, in that scenario, people like a classic example is my mate from Romania, Odoamne. Their whole thing is, you can't win. Like consistently, you're not going to win because you're playing it like in a scenario without the resources. So their job is lose as gracefully as possible. And that word gracefully is doing all the heavy lifting, but it's a great fucking terminology, because the point is they can lose and make it look classy. Like, yeah, they'll lose, but they'll lose the minimum possible. Or they'll be in a scenario where the matchup shouldn't even be possible to play, but they make it like almost work. And what they essentially do is they just absorb all that pressure, all the enemy's resources, all the enemy's attacks. And in doing so, you're freeing up the other people on your team. So it's just like the analogy of the CT, B-site anchor, etc. Like your job in that scenario, this is where Inters was amazing on maps like Overpass, was Your job is just stay alive for as long as possible sometimes and make them have to fuck around with an extra flash, taking more time to check before they get the bomb down. These are all things that don't seem like much to a player, but they don't get it. Like 3 seconds extra before a bomb goes down might be the difference between your godlike Rops lurker winning the round and not winning the round. Between your AWPer being able to rotate in, get a shot off for free, and choose to go for the round instead of just having to save immediately. Scenarios like wasting an extra flash, an extra smoke, a molly to get you out of position. That might be a big deal, actually. That might, again, be something in the post plan that gives your team a chance. So I think essentially it's one of the most underrated qualities. It's why I don't really blame the nephews when they think the Inters of the world is shit or they can't see what Carrigan does on T-side. He's just not fragging anyone. It's like, they can't see it. I get that. But essentially, like, because Carrigan on T-side entry is a great example as well. He knows he's going to die. His question is sort of like, if I know I'm going to die, which I've already accepted, by the way, most players can't accept that. They need favourable scenarios. If I know I'm going to die, how do I get the most out of it? Essentially for the next guy coming in behind me. It's what my old mate MSL used to actually be very good at on the entry side too. So I think that's a core. The way I phrased it there is how I conceptualized this concept.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Inters was definitely one. I mean, it was the first YouTube video I made because I think there were so many people that talked about the Gambit roster through Shuro, Axile, Hobbit, Nafany even, but nobody
people did actually used to big up Nafany as mad as it sounds. They did. It's true.
Yeah. And people never talked about Inters, and I really got my gears turning. I'm like, well, he's got to have some role in this team, right? If he's not getting the numbers, and of course that's where you start to realize that he's got so much more of a role where he would always be finding so much information. He would always be playing sound cues. Like he'd play anti-flash in certain scenarios where he'd just sit in a corner and he'd stare at a wall on vertigo. Like I think that mid little cubby angle with that wood, the stacked wood, where he would just sit on that and play anti-flash and listen to the A ramp players that are walking past the bridge below him on T side. Or he would hear whether there's players coming out mid. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, you don't see players do that, really, to play for so much information. I think it's super valuable to have. And I think the last big thing that I had, it's a caveat, but it's a nice addition to have, and that's clutch factor. I mean, some of these players were really, really good at bringing up a big clutch in some tight moments. And I mean, sure, their aim isn't necessarily the greatest in the world, but they're cerebral enough to win a clutch here or there, to swing the economy back in your favor and get your star player back in the game mentally. Players like NBK did it. Perfecto's done it. Actually, as of recent, he's done a lot more than usual. Taco was able to pull off some 1v2s here and there. And Neo, famously on VP, was always willing to do it. I think that... Overall, I think the clutch factor is also super valuable for some of these teams because sometimes, I mean, your star player might get checked out of these matches, and that's a really good way to kickstart the momentum back into your team. And players like this, even if they would have unfavorable rotations, playing those B-side anchor positions could still pull off some Herculean tasks. And I think that would definitely elevate some of them in terms of where they were at ranked as a support player.
I mean, this ties in actually to a fact that I had, because to me, I also think when people think clutch, it's like they do this in basketball as well. They think it's only all that crap of like the last 2 minutes and they go ahead basket to do. It's like, no, that you're talking about like a Michael Jordan movie final scene. Like being clutch can also be like you're so amazing in the first 3 quarters, the game's over. Like you don't even have to carry out the game. So I would also say being clutch to me, because it's a mentality, that's another aspect I had, which is the idea that they hold their nerve. You know you're going to play a crap position. You know you're in a shit scenario. You know you don't have help. You know actually like you're someone like I say where maybe you're supposed to get a kill. You're supposed to stay alive 2 or 3 seconds longer. So these players, I think people like Inters even apply like this. You look at them, they actually do look like they have rock solid nerves. They don't look like it doesn't look like it wears them down that they're taking the dick all the time, as people would say if they're pro players. It doesn't look like it even bothers them that they'll never get the credit. They are just the guys. It's why when Edward played this role in Navi, I used to say, sadly he became a meme at the end of the Simpler, so people think he was shit. But if you remember when he was good in 2015, 2016, I used to say if you even looked at him, because he'd played 1 billion lands, he was like a grizzled war veteran who was on his like 7th tour, and he's like the guy where it's like, he goes home and he just doesn't fit in, so he's like, right, back to the front. And he's just that crazy sort of mentality to never give in. So that's a mad underrated aspect, because if you see the players who get put in these roles, sometimes people who even have like skills get put in these positions, and if they don't have the nerve, they get absolutely crushed by fans, by pressure, by their teammates. Like it's one of the factors, quite frankly, that I'm getting the feeling in Navi's going on, which is, I mean, the SDY himself's even hinted at this. You get the sense that 5th player in Navi has become the like poison chalice of the 5th spot in the old NIP, where it's like you're there to just fail, be the one that gets blamed, have everyone in the team go, maybe we should cut this guy. And it's, and you know that in the whole time. So to actually have the guy who can keep the mental in that sense, it's why, by the way, Alan was the one who helped break that to some degree, because he's another guy which just doesn't give a fuck. He's just going to go in and play his game. He doesn't really care what you think. But lastly, I'll just say this. The reason that the whole support player angle has been ruined, because people don't understand it, it's a tendency / an amount of resources, not actually like a set role on the map at all times, is because even when you say support player, people go, you mean the one who throws the flashes? Well, as you said, if you're a pure entry, but the one who just runs as the bait, actually you get the flashes thrown for you, but you provide resources still because you create space for the guy behind you, which, by the way, people never acknowledge this still. How many, you must see this. I made these videos like 8 years ago at this point in time. Probably the best position in Counter-Strike to get frags, like in the modern day, yeah, it could be super bait lurker. That's pretty good for the Ropses and the Blame Fs of the world. But after that, the actual best position isn't even necessarily AWP on T-side, by the way. It's second guy into the site. It's the position that Forest, ideally people like Axile and Config play. By the way, you notice when they get made to be the hard entry, starts drop off a fucking cliff because they're just human at the end of the day. So to me, people also mistake that, yeah, you can be the guy throwing the flashes and sort of following someone up. That's a way to support. But another way to support is create the space that then a great player moves into, and you've made the game easier for him. So again, ties back to what I said at the beginning, you make it better for other people. Right. You got anything on that?
Oh yeah, I think I mean you make a good point there. I think the last thing that I had was just the fact that they can mold their gameplay to other rosters as well. I mean, of course, all of these players that we've talked about mainly do it on one roster, but the cream of the crop for me is NBK and Taco, particularly Taco going to Liquid, doing so much work there, making them one of the best forms of Liquid ever possible, and NBK doing it with, you know, OG with the brief stint with Maus, and of course all the French rosters that he was a part of. He would always bring them at least one title or get them close to winning a title, and of course Taco, I think could have won championships with Liquid as well, but of course Astralis existed. So I think that's the other thing, just malleability on other rosters, and showing that, you know, support doesn't have to necessarily work with one set of 4 players, but it can work with any sort of players or any roles that need to be filled. Making sure that everyone knows that, you know, support is a very loose term. It's not necessarily set in stone.
Right. My first topic goes like this. It's an incredibly open-ended one, so we'll see where you go with it. It is who, keyword who, was the biggest what if in CSGO history?
The first player that jumped to mind was Tapson. Because I've seen what he's been doing on Big now, and it as CSGO winds down, it's such a bummer to see that it's basically all a wash. I mean, whatever Tapson did in Counter-Strike is pointless, and yet you can see the peaks that this guy had when Big was at their relative peak with the Smooya lineup way back when in Cologne, and even before that, I'd like to think, and he had so much skill to give that he could have gone to any amount of lineups, any sort of international lineup, and joined hands with an elite IGL and taken them over top. Even North America was at a point where they were willing to spend enough money to bring over some of these expensive EU rifles, and I think he could have done that as well. But at the end of it all, I mean, you look at him having to sacrifice so much to be an IGL, to bring up the next generation of German talent, which, spoiler, is not very special, all things considered. And it's just it's a bummer to me that, you know, Tapson will never go down as one of the greatest EU rifles, but instead is just going to be considered a what if, and will not be acknowledged really by anybody. And he never was in terms of the top 20, but I definitely think, top 20 players of each year, but he definitely could have been there. I mean, I think he was 22, 21 in a lot of these scenarios, but that was under underpowered lineups. I mean, imagine if he was able to play under, you know, a Kerrigan or some IGL of the sort, and he didn't have to worry about any of that calling. Imagine what kind of peaks he could have hit. I think Tapson is definitely one of the biggest what ifs for me.
Right, what I'll do is I have a few names that I think also couple of them will be obvious. One or two will be off there, and then I'll say which my actual one is. So it'll go like this. The most obvious immediate name I think of is just Nico, because I think actually I don't even need to change any of his play. He could play an identical game because he was absurdly good at Counter-Strike. Like if you take out accomplishments, he's a top 3 player probably ever to play the game. He's unbelievably good. But the problem obviously is he never got the championships. My biggest problem isn't even like what happened in the major finals. Mine is just that once he got to even the first iteration of FaZe, the one where they had Alu and Kiyashima, so it was still a strong lineup of good players, and he had Rain as another sidekick, and he had Carrigan. From that period on until basically, I mean, I would say obviously now he's had this last year or so in G2, but I would say the initial period in G2 that wasn't quite a good enough lineup, etc. I'll give him the break there. But the whole period where, to some degree, he was part of the reason they didn't get a better IGL. They didn't try on some of the names I wanted them to. Now, true, it's this case that like they couldn't get the page they wanted. Maybe they wanted this person and put his legendary names. But I just know that he didn't want people like the MSLs of the world. He wouldn't have wanted an Alexi B, etc. Like basically, he could have tried some of these people. So my problem is, if I think with him, the reason it's a massive what if is all he has to do is make different career decisions. And I really do think he could have had it all. He could have had it all. He could have had more titles than Simple Ziwu. I don't know about Device, because Device really pushed the boat out there. So there's one, but that's more like circumstantial, like your career. I guess that's hard to really know what if it is. A couple of other player ones I had was, one immediately is Oscar, because again, in his case, it's more just weird social dynamics. I think this guy was absurdly good. Like, spoiler, I do know some of his teammates, so I have the inside track on this one. But when everyone used to tell me, no, it's Shunny and that teammate, look at Shunny. Oh, it's Rops, the young Rops. It was Oscar, mate. If you ever go, he's the one that was like the game changer. When he was on his game, if people don't know, he was like Simple Light. And Simple was the absolute best player we'd ever seen. Like, he was really fucking good. Then, obviously, the another name, and I'll get to my real one, is Config. I've just always thought, not only is he zigged when he should have zagged constantly in his career in terms of teams, but obviously, this is the guy who fucked up the first fucking chance at refusal to be in Astralis. If he just essentially just asked me what to say and what not to say, this motherfucker would have been in Astralis instead of Magisk. Now, we can never know how many titles you would have won. This is like when I do that thing of like, what if Peyton Manning had Bill Belichick? Well, even so, it's still hard to believe you'd win 7 rings. I mean, when you won 6 with Belichick. But, but even so, you'd win some, you'd hope. You'd hope you'd have an amazing career. But I'm not going to pick all those ones. I'm going to do a true foreign classic. Because here's the real what if, and it is existence. Oh, yeah, he found a way in 2023 to bring existence into it. But here's why. Because I actually don't think existence, in terms of the games he called, had any problems. Like, this is the issue. There's 2 factors. One is because the only time he made a relevant run at the majors was the first major, DreamHack Winter 2013. And when they got to the big match against NIP, and they'd beaten NIP those last 3 times on LAN, they were supposed to win it. And if they'd have won, the team they play in the final, Fnatic, is a team that not only before did he always match up well against, even when he lost fucking Kaylee, he used to be able to match up well with them after this, years later. And in fact, right to the end of their careers against Pronox, he just always performed well, even when they were in LDLC and Godset. So basically, this was a guy who was in the position where he could have had like championships, best lineups in the world, but he only really had like 1 or 2, and it was really that first one. And so what basically, that was just one of those games where I think if you replay that semi-final 10 times, I think they win it 5 or 6 times. Like they were the favourite. So if they win that, they would have won the final. They would have won the first major. Now, the reason that is key is this, because the problems existence had later and why all of his stars kept leaving to go to play with Happy and go with NBK, and NBK had problems with him and Sharks had problems with him. And the reason why, and Happy had problems with, the reason why there was all this dispute is because when you're going to be the guy who says, like, I'm essentially the smartest guy in the room, everyone do what I say, there can't be a crack in the armour. There can't be an aspect where people question, like, And so the problem was fucking up that first major. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. It's like, yeah, they'll win the next one. Never got out of groups again. And the problem is, after a couple of those, not only did the team all just tell me over the years, well, if you choke at majors, like, what's the point in playing with you? It doesn't matter how good you are. But he started to believe it. I'm almost certain of it. If I saw some of those later chokes, I think it was in his head as well. Because I think part of choking is psychological in the sense of, like, you get put into the same scenario again and you think of the same things again and you think it's inevitable, it's going to happen again. In the same ways, or the opposite, you saw FaZe turn this around. When you're the best clutch team ever. You think you're always going to get out of trouble. You always think Robert's going to win that clutch. You always think Brokey's going to win this 1v2. It becomes the opposite kind of psychological momentum. And so what I would say is this. The existence style and why he couldn't do the approach he wanted was the Titan team after the failed first major when they got to the semis. Because in that team, the story goes like this. They actually were in a team house when they were Titan, if people don't know this. And in the team house, remember, there weren't team houses in Counter-Strike. He was like a general. He was like a drill sergeant. He was having them work every map, and he wouldn't just do what they wanted, which is at the time everyone wanted to do Fnatic, like default Counter-Strike, play a bit like NIP, just make it loose, let the stars do what. No, he wanted it to be traditional Counter-Strike, and for real, he had like flow charts for all tactics that were like, if this happens, here's like the 4 things that come out of that. Now the problem with that is, you imagine you have to have all 4 players 100% buy in. Like I said, they have to really think you're the mega mind, and even if they think it's not right or they don't want to do that, they just know I've got to do what this guy says. And the problem is, you can only get that cachet if they believe you're always right and that you're going to make the right call. And so the problem is, I think when when the aura was cracked early, after that, it didn't matter how well he called it. Yeah, he could do an upset, he could do a run to a semis, but there's a reason he could never get the right players around him. So as mad as it sounds, the reason I think its existence is, imagine if he actually didn't have this like flaw, because if you do that first major and you win it, it's just not the same momentum going forward. People would give you way more chances. By the way, I've always said Carrigan would have never been kicked from FaZe if they'd have won the Boston major. It wouldn't matter if the results are the same. It's like Fallen and all the players he plays with. Because you've won those majors, they just think of you at your peak. They think you can get back there. So basically, I think it would have just changed it would have upturned the whole apple cart of CSGO history. His matchup with Pronax would be interesting. Carrigan's in the game. People coming along later, Fallen. Like, how awesome would it have been to have this name in the mix with all the great IGLs as well?
I think in terms of IGLs as well, MSL, I think jumps to mind. It sucks that his team revolted against him on North, and they made that mistake. And after that, it was a bit too late for anything to be rectified. You had Rogue, Optic. None of these lineups were really legit. But you look beyond that, how many international rosters there were that were in flux for so long that just needed a dedicated IGL that could have taken them over the top in terms of outside of the online era or right before the online era. Of course, we wouldn't actually know that COVID would happen and all of that would come to be. But there were so many opportunities for MSL to actually build his own roster and actually have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. But he was never given that opportunity. And you see what he was able to do with the rosters that he was given, and the way that he was still willing to adapt time in and time out, even though there were certain scenarios where people thought he was way too stuck in his ways, that he couldn't change his game, but he was still able to do it. Of course, you think about the crazy Stockholm win that they had, where he is opping for crying out loud. Those kinds of adaptations don't come from any kind of IGL. And I think that there was always a possibility that he had something left in the tank and that he could have done a lot with an international lineup. And if he was actually given every right from an organization to pick and choose the players that he wanted and actually conduct a team the way he did, who knows? Because we've seen what the results come from when the organizations do give him that respect. And this is the fact that his stock just completely plummeted after the failed re-entry into North was just such a bummer, because that lineup was already doomed to fail once he came back in. And I don't think they were ready to kind of claw their way back. I think that North organization didn't know what they were doing. And I think that he could have definitely had a couple opportunities as well. Other than that, I feel like I kind of misread the question. I said I was thinking it was like, what was the biggest what if? But I kind of grouped in a lot of the NA players that left after Valorant came out. I'm thinking just about the state of the region and the fact that we lost players like Sean Gares, Nothing, Steel, that could have been there to nurture new talent. And then we could have had a lot of outstanding NA talent to potentially keep some of these organizations alive, like your Liquids, like your EGs. Zeppa, Leaf, Psalm, Wardell, Sick, Ye, Ethan. All of these players had promise. They showed some skill on LAN, and they were doing well under the tutelage of players like Daps and whatnot. And I think that, of course, it's not one specific player, but I do think that overall, if that exodus never happened, who knows what could have come from the North American region altogether. I think there was definitely a lot of possibilities there. The next question that I had was, what is the greatest CIS roster that can be made right now with current form of all players with roles being as close to fulfilled as possible? And basically, the reason why I'm asking this question, I mean, we're heading into the off season. I think a lot of people are thinking that, you know, CIS is chock full of talent right now. There's so many different avenues that so many of these teams can go in. You look at Navi, they're pretty simple. It's pretty disgruntled, all things said. NPL is probably going to get the boot, but I mean, there's rumors of potentially Blade leaving that roster. You look at C9, you know, Buster. I mean, Buster, Nafany, Groove, all are being called into question. You look at how frustrated Shiro is when they play some of these last few tournaments. That lineup might blow up. And I mean, you look at the fallout of VP. VP doesn't look very good as of right now. They don't really necessarily know what they're doing with their roster. Spirit is also one of them that's fallen out of grace. But there's so much talent and so much possibility with all of these rosters. I'd like to know what you think the best possible roster is right now and why in terms of weighing up the options per role.
Okay, that's interesting. There's one angle I've got to work out, so I'm just quickly looking this up now. Because the trickiest part already of this roster is I need to figure out what player enables like my entry fragger, basically. And I'm actually just trying to see who, in terms of like opening kills, who does this the most. See, the problem is, I actually think there's loads of players you can go with. Like, obviously, we won't go into this, but part of the reason why you can't just do this in Navi is they just don't seem to want to recruit the Russian players. And so there's loads of Russian talent out there if people don't think about it. Like, there's obviously the players in Cloud9, there's the players in Virtus Pro. So I think, to me, the obvious thing you're going to do is you're going to take some of the Navi players, the parts that you think work the best, and you're going to put it with a bunch of Russian players. To me, that's the obvious way to make this team work. So when I think about how to make this squad, I actually think it's going to be something like, I'm going to do where I cheat, by the way. I'm going to do it a bit like if you've ever seen when people make their their starting five in basketball, right? There's ways you can cheat, which is like this. Like, for example, in basketball, you don't have to actually have all five traditional roles. You could just say, like, I don't have a small forward. I just have like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and they just go on either wing, you know, and it's more like whoever's got the ball, he's on the other side. And I just sort of, the idea is, yeah, I wouldn't have a traditional team, but good luck beating me. You know, offensively, I'd be amazing. So I'm sort of going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the classic cheat, which doesn't usually work in reality, but if you ever do get it to work, it will be the dream, which is you just sort of do two players who go in the entry pack, and you assume they could take turns or like set each other up, as it were, and that is how you would do it. So maybe like when LeBron and D Wade played together, they still could both sort of have the ball together and play off each other. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm not going to pick Shiro because I'm going to take Simple. Like, I actually think part of Simple's problems also is he doesn't have a proper IGL. And I think this is one thing that people might not get. In the game, him and Blade do have a very deep idea of how they want to play, but they both have the same fatal flaw, which is that they think that like brand new players can understand what the fuck they're talking about or can conceptualize some of these really deep, like sort of end game scenario ways of playing out around. I just don't think they can. Like, I think you actually have to keep it very simple with rookies, or you have to put them in the dumbest roles. And quite frankly, I don't think they do that with some of them. So I would still take Simple. I think he's still going to be the best. People forget with the whole Shiro thing, he doesn't get to play that often in finals and semis. And even then, he's sort of a coin flip as to whether he shows up. Sometimes he just doesn't. So for me, I'm going to take Simple. That's the easy one. He is the GOAT. He can still be the best player in my opinion. Then what I'm going to do is, in terms of like on the entry side of the equation, I'm going to cheat, like I said. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take Axile, but I'm also going to take Flit. And I'm just going to take both of them, and they're just going to figure it out. And all I'm going to say is this. First of all, in any world where they actually could make that work, I mean, good luck. Like, Simple's coming after these guys. And Simple's an aggressive AWPer anyway. Like, that's already going to be pretty tough. I think those two players are just fucking monster AK players. Like, I don't know, again, how it would work in reality, because I imagine in their teams, they're probably somewhat put into vaguely similar spots, and they're more playing off the other guy. So I'm idealizing them here. Then I'm going to finish out the other two. The only other player I'm taking from Navi is Perfecto. I think he's just mega at what he does. Ties into what we said on the first topic there. He's still, by the way, arguably still the best at the supportive role. Still might be the best in the game. I even thought when the rest of the team went to shit, he still held up pretty well. His stats can't hold up because you're just in harder scenarios when you're that player. So I always said, stop saying Zipnix can be the MVP, you morons. If he didn't have like sick glaive calls, debris entries, Magus mid-rounds, and fucking device ops, he wouldn't have those 1v2s. They'd be 1v4s, and the guys have had full health, no comms. You know what I mean? I always said that was so dumb. So then here we go. I saved it till the end because this is the Oh, if you thought that was picante, little Axel and Flit. No, bro. Because my IGL, oh yeah, it's Jim. What? What? But here's the thing. Here's how it works. Because one, as an IGL, I actually do think he's the best in the region. Even though VP's in a shit spot at the moment, I think some of that's the stupid stuff they did with their roster. Spoiler, they weren't that great anyway. In fact, the whole reason they won the major is because Richard Lewis was right. They essentially feasted on an era when everyone else was whack. They had a coherent style and they were fairly clutch. And they were on the honeymoon period of the lineup, you could say at that point in time. So for me, the reason I'm taking James, I do think he's the best IGL. I even think his slow style would be fucking loved by some of these players. I think people like Simple, fucking Axel, I think they would actually vibe with this. And here's the most genius part. You're already thinking, but he has to have the AWP Thor in. I've got Simple. It's like that old classic saying that Kobe said to Shaq when he joined the Lakers. Shaq goes like, pass me the ball. He goes, just get the rebound off the glass. Here's what you say to James. Mate, you can pick up the AWP when Simple dies with it, and then you've got it to fuck around with it and save, haven't you? Like, or do your bullshit 1v2 clutch. Like, I think I've actually fixed your problems, James. And spoiler, if there's anyone could tell you, give me that fucking AWP here. It's going to be simple, isn't it? So you're going to give it up and then you're just going to go and pick it up from him. Perfect scenario. I think I've fixed the team there. So I've gone for like the true like super team approach. I'm just trying to overwhelm you with all the parts. But I also think like beyond like the entry part, which I sort of cheated on, I think this could even work. I think there's a world where it could work.
The Axile Flit angle was one that I completely vibed with. I think that makes complete sense. I mean, it is very, very aggressive, but I do think there's, well, I mean, you think about the way they play Mirage, for example. I mean, Flit is usually the mid-con player, and Axile is usually that B lurker. And I think it could work if you could just put them in different parts of the map. I mean, Gambit did it very well, where you would have like a player like Hobbit on one side of the map, and you have Axile on the other, and they would kind of just converge and keep feeling out parts of the map, and it worked very, very well. So I think it's possible. And of course, you can't deny the kind of playmaking ability that both of these players have. I mean, Flit in particular, I mean, I always think about Mirage. I think everybody does when you think about Flit, and just the way that he can have so many different decisions that he has to make, and he always makes the right one. And then you pair that with the kind of first bullet accuracy that this guy has, and it's just unreal. I think in terms of...
And by the way, just to throw this out there, people are going to obviously debate, like, there's a rifle and an entry as you look at... I don't think that even exists anymore in the game. Like, as you say, if you're on the opposite sides of the map, it depends what happens in the game. It depends where you engage for. So I think that... I can't say... They'll figure that out.
Right. And I think I have to vibe with the Perfecto pick as well. There's no other choice in terms of supportive elements. I mean, you've got Siren on Spirit, maybe Hobbit if you wanted to, Inters maybe, but I think Perfecto does the best at stalling. I think that is definitely his best characteristic for all of these players that are going to be playing as aggressive as they are. You need a player that is willing to stall on both sides of the map, and I think Perfecto is easily the player to do that. And I think he's probably the most clutch out of all of these players too. I think he could get that job done as well. So I think I'd go with Perfecto.
There's no way you went with Jim though. Come on, there's no way you went with Jim. I'm guessing you didn't go with Jim or Simple. So who did you go with?
No. So I went with Jerry. I went with Jerry from Forza because he's got the synergy with Flit. I think the best that he actually looked before VP was on Forza, and I think that synergy could work very, very well. Flit has developed his game so much at this point, playing under James in terms of the complexities of how he plays certain roles. But now you bring that sort of knowledge alongside Jerry, and that kind of 1-2 punch could be super, super awesome. And I think Jerry works very well with aggressive rifles. I think he's figured out a way to do that with Forza, where they have this very pack mentality. It's not very complex CS, but the way that he uses these rifles, they look so, so good at just barreling their way into these sites. And then, of course, on CT sides, I think he's gotten a very good grasp of how to approach CT setups. He's mastered, or not mastered, but I think he's like semi-mastered CT aggression and how to have that mid-round play as a CT. And I think that it's finally time for him to get some pieces that actually work. I mean, for so long he's been having to play with the tier 2 best rifles in CIS, which of course is still incredible. But imagine him actually working with those better pieces. I think he could do so much with them. And I think, of course, he's been able to work with younger players very well across his career. I mean, you just look at the Forza roster right now with Shalfie, Zorte, ReScope. I mean, you've never even heard of these players before they actually came onto Forza, and yet they are slowly starting to get into that conversation of, can they make that tier 1 jump? I mean, they're showing numbers at the biggest tournaments when they do get into those scenarios. So I think Jerry could get it done. Well, that brings the question: who's opting for this team? And I think that Simple is definitely the best option. But I'm going to go a little bit left field and pick Shiro in this situation, just because I think, again, I'd like stability with aggressive rifles that I have in Flint and Axile, and I want them to be the stars. I think Shiro is one of the best post-up operas that we possibly have in the game right now, and if you could just have him kind of take over parts of the map on his own, you could have the other parts of the map being worked by Axile and Flint. You could have Shiro. So if you think about like Vertigo, I mean, Shiro could just take care of all of bottom of A ramp all on his own, and then you could have Axile and Flint work mid or work B ramp, and they could have those different mid-round aggressions as they so please, if they depending on how they're feeling at the game. And Jerry could be that second-hand man depending on where they want to go in, and have that trade system going. And I think that overall, Shiro, of course, you have that caveat of you don't know what he's like in those big games. But I mean, we have gotten a little bit of a taste of it in terms of like elimination games that C9 have had to face in the major cycles, and how he's put the team on his back in certain scenarios. I think that there's some clutch factor there that he can perform when the going gets tough. And of course, it's a coin flip. You never actually know whether Shiro is going to actually perform. But I think there's enough of a small enough sample size that I could take the gamble and say that Jerry could work with Shiro and have him be that post-up opper and have him, just take over parts of the map as he so pleases.
Right. For my next question, it's going to be this. Which single match result would you change given the choice? I didn't even put any other context on it. You could do a stupid meme one if you want. You could do whatever you want here. So which match in history are you going to change the result of? I didn't even technically say that you have to make like the other team win. You could just change the way the game went. It's up to you. What are you going with?
The stupid meme one I would pick is probably Olaf, the Olaf boost, just because, I mean, I think that Fnatic still played a really good game. I don't think that they did anything wrong. Personally, I think finding a boost like that is just really impressive, and the fact that they were able to pull that off is just really masterful, and I think that they probably deserved it, in all honesty, and perhaps we would view a lot of those players very differently if we were able to give them that major. But my legitimate ones, I think the first one that always will jump off the page is I just wish FaZe won Boston, in all honesty. It just makes the most sense narratively for so many of those players. I mean, of course, Nico would finally get that elusive first, and all of these conversation with G2 and FaZe after is pretty much irrelevant. It'd be cool for him to get his first. Guardian, another one of those players who has been playing his heart and soul out. I mean, even in Boston itself, he was having an unreal tournament. Olaf gets his third. That would be really awesome to have a little bit more of a resume on him. Kerrigan would have gotten his first much earlier. I think a lot of flack that he caught later on in his career could have been shut down earlier on, and Kerrigan could have been viewed in a very different light. And of course, Rain, the franchise player, would put in so much work in the G2 Kingwin lineups and even in FaZe to finally get his due and stick with that core and finally get rewarded for it. That could have been really awesome. I think the other one that really jumps off the page is Liquid beating Astralis at the Berlin Major. Of course, the player break existed. Liquid weren't the strongest in that major. They definitely weren't that Grand Slam winning mentality. But I mean, you look at the route that they would have beyond Astralis, and it was pretty much a cakewalk, all things said. I mean, you have to play NRG, and historically, domestically, they stomped NRG in every domestic competition. There was no real battle there, regardless of the level that Liquid was showing. And of course, Avantgarde in the final was going to be a cakewalk. I mean, Liquid were always able to stomp the easier opposition in front of them. It wasn't really a question of whether they would get upset, because they weren't getting upset, all things said. And I think Avantgarde would have been very, very easily doable, and they would have gotten their first legit major. It wouldn't even be considered a fluke major. It would have capped a really formative era that they were forming for so long, and they would have actually had a little bit more of a say in terms of that era conversation if they would have had that major to cap it all off.
Right. The thing is, two of the ones you mentioned are in the three that I think are the real ones I would pick. Like, obviously, I've already done the existence one, so I could change that semi-final against an IP at DreamHack Winter, but say I don't do that one. The obvious one I would pick is the the FaZe versus Cloud9 Boston Major, because as you say, the implications for like every player in the team are just ridiculous. Like, it literally is a game changer for everyone's resume, and crucially for Nico and Kerrigan, I think it just changes the whole history. Like, I think that's where they would be able to have like a Shaq-Kobe relationship, but just keep keep it going and just win for years. Even someone like Guardian, not only did he not win a major, but then he just ended up having wasted the last 2 years of his prime, so he never really got it. The other one is, like you say, the Liquid versus Astralis one, because what sucks so much is, even if you just lost to them in the final, at least you were in the final. What sucks that year, what denied them Team of the Year status, is not only did Astralis win both majors, but you went out in the round of 8 of both of them. That just killed you. Right there, if you'd have made like the final of one, there's a world now, and especially if you actually won one, they would just been the Team of the Year 2019. And that would totally change everything. And by the way, if they win that major, that's an era right there. Instantly, it's the era. So that just changes everything in history. And I do sort of feel like the dumbest thing about how nephews remember the game is they really do think because Cloud9 won the major, Cloud9 is greater than Team Liquid. And it's like, bro, both those Team Liquid lineups, 2018 and 2019, are greater than Cloud9 winning the major. Just go look what Cloud9 did before and afterwards. It's not even close. And then so there's the three that obviously I would take. And like I say, I would take the Boston major one. But I did have two other ones. And obviously, I'm not going to pick one, but I think these two bear mentioning. One is the match I say that even though, look, he might have actually hit like better statistical peaks later, but I do think that match where Na'Vi played against Mouse at Star Series, where Simple was just dropping a million frags and Zeus had like the 6 kills on the fucking Mirage game, which was the second map in overtime. Like, if they just win that, right, the reason why it would be amazing is this. Like, not only have I never seen a player deserve a win more than fucking Simple in that game, but if he wins that at that time, this is when Astralis is about to go mental. Like, there wouldn't even have been this uphill challenge of like, is he the GOAT though? It's like, mate, every idiot who goes, oh, he won the trophy and he was the GOAT. Like, that would just be the most goated run of all time. Like, you just look at that one tournament and go, this guy actually can single-handedly win the tournament. And then the other one I was going to put in there, people will forget this one, but I also think this could have changed history, which is that ESL New York final that Mouse with Snacks won over Team Liquid. Because people forget, in the rest of the year, you say the obvious line. Look, you always beat Na'Vi, you usually beat FaZe as well. You couldn't beat Astralis, but they're the greatest team of all time. This was the tournament where Astralis didn't attend because they went to that bullshit like Blast or whatever it was. Blastistan Bull, I think. So this was the one where, also, it's best of 5. You were up 2-1. And then the third map, which was just 2, you won like 11-4 on T-side in the first half. Like, it's right there. It's right there. It's like it's almost like one of those fucking ladder matches in wrestling. It's like, it's just reach up and grab it. It's yours. You're the champion. And even though, yes, everyone would have said, yeah, but Astralis isn't there. But that's what would have worked in your favour, is that you could then just say, yeah, we only lose when Astralis isn't there. And don't we all agree they're the greatest team in history? So we're really fucking awesome too, aren't we? Whereas, as I said, nephews think fucking Cloud9 Boston major team's better because of one tournament, because of one big fucking series. And I also, if people remember, that was another tournament where Twist won the MVP despite losing the final because he had like his first insane pop-off. This whole best of 5, he was bonkers the numbers. So I also just think about what it does to like him as a superstar player, what it does to that. By the way, at that point in time, Zeus and Tackle probably just fucking staying, mate. Do they really go and gamble and go back to the MIBR team? As far as I can tell, that only SK Gaming at the time, that only happened because they didn't win. So then when Fall and the others called, hey, let's put together a last dance because these cocksuckers will be on that ship for 5 years. Well, then it seemed attractive because they're not winning, are they, at that point in time? Because, by the way, that's the detail that people don't know. People think it's the other way around, like, but it's because of Stewie and he is a major. No. That's because MIBR wanted rid of this fucking guy and they wanted, it was MIBR at the time, and they obviously wanted to go back and recreate the old lineup with Phelps and see if they could run it back, etc. So I just think that would have also been a sick one to change in history. And then lastly, they had to kick Snacks anyway after that because it just wasn't a fucking good lineup, was it? Like, he wasn't a Steeko replacement. So even that was just a stupid one-off win that they got to have, like, lol, you were wrong. Even though if you remember, they bombed that major before that 0-3. And then I'll just add in as well, that was the tournament after the Face It major where Team Liquid played Astralis but in the semis, and it was like, yeah, again, they can't beat this one team. So if the narrative is they go to the big land with every other top team except Astralis and then they win it, then at that point in time, I think it just shows so much better in history, because when you lose that one, people start doing the heroic, like, wait a minute, you just lose to anyone. You lose to yourself in the finals, you know? So I also do think that those things, you can handle losing to the best team in history. You can't handle when, like, some team like that just rocks up and Chris J is just fucking acing you and, like, the most ridiculous out of nowhere clutch ace of all time. Like, yeah, I think that would just, it doesn't seem like a big deal to some people, but I wish I could take that one back if I had a little genie.
I think there was a couple other that I had, I mean, at majors. I think about the MLG Columbus, I mean, that one round that if Cold Zera didn't have the jumping no scope and perhaps Liquid could have played the final, maybe they could have won there, and that could have added more of a resume to Simple's career earlier on. It would have risen his stock. Maybe he would have had the belief to go to another international roster. He might not have just played on Navi. Maybe he would have gone somewhere else, knowing that he has that capability of winning on an international team. And then the other one was...
Oh, by the way, as an aside as well, I can tell you behind the scenes, if they'd have somehow fluke won any of those majors, that one or Cologne, there's a world where like Team Liquid, the org, just offers so much money he does there. That would have really been on. If you know what they're like in League of Legends, where they've tried to get like fucking Faker and people like that, like if you'd like give you a world championship, they might have just said like, here's like the blank check. So there's a world where that could have happened. That's not even implausible, mate.
And then I was always a big fan of the VP roster. I think that they were in touching distance of Atlanta. I mean, if Zibnix didn't have that huge 1v3 on Overpass, I mean, if there weren't just it would have been just over and done with right then and there. And that's like a 1 in a million clutch. I mean, you don't expect that to happen anytime with 1 HP like that. And who knows the trajectory of VP? I mean, I always think about, what if that whole Las Vegas situation didn't happen? Maybe they could have stuck together for a little longer. Like I honestly might have even changed them not even winning Las Vegas and they actually lose Las Vegas and the Mercedes doesn't get given away or whatever, and maybe the team stays together. Maybe Poland looks like a better region now because they would have had a possibility of actually nurturing younger players a little bit more.
Steady on, okay, fair enough.
That's a bit of a pipe.
That part's a bit of a reach at the end where it's like the whole, like you're making it at the end, so it's like that fucking meme where you live on the space colony inside like a big wheel, like the future, if VP didn't get that Mercedes. Like, I don't know that. Look, we're just changing one match here, not all of history, Right, what's your next topic?
The last topic that I had, I mean, of course, FaZe has won the last, I'm assuming the last CSGO Grand Slam at this point. I mean, the next Grand Slam, I mean, we can get there when we get there. It's going to mix in with CS2. But as of right now, the four Grand Slam winners, Astralis, Liquid, Navi, FaZe. And I wanted to rank the strength of each of their resumes because I think it's very interesting in the fashion that all four of these teams won it. I think they're very different between one another. And I think actually ranking it in a certain way would kind of showcase what you actually value in the resume and what makes it a stronger resume as compared to another one. So what is your actual ranking here between these four teams?
See, the problem is, and this is actually quite subtle, is the bottom two are easy. It goes like this. Like, Navi is the bottom by far because most of them are fucking online. Like that, I don't even think that should be allowed to be a Grand Slam personally. Like, I understand Intel's wanted to give the money away and ESL wanted to keep it going and connect it to history, but I think that's whack as fuck. That's easily number 4 for me. And then I actually probably put, I'd probably put FaZe third. And the reason why is there's no major involved in it. By the way, there's no major involved in any of these Grand Slams. It's actually just one of the wild details about them. But there's no major involved. And crucially, like this was where one of their, like two of theirs were fucking those pro leagues at like studio lands. So it's like, so yeah, you won Cologne, that's big. But those studio lands, that's like halfway between online and the thing. But then this is where he's only done it and he's got spicy. Astralis is second. Ooh, what? No, you're all forgetting. As I just said, you're good. But that wasn't part of the Grand Slam. They'd already won the Grand Slam before that. There was no major involved within the Grand Slam. And if you go and look, two of theirs were Pro League finals. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not the same, by the way, as like giant Cologne type event. One was IEM Chicago, which isn't bad, but whatever. It's just an NA event. It's just like a good LAN. And then the other one was DreamHack Marseille, which again, is just like a good LAN. Like these aren't like Katowice. These aren't Cologne. Whereas on Liquids, like the first thing everyone's going to do is, yeah, but there was no Astralis. First of all, Astralis did go to some of these tournaments. Like two of the ones that they won, they were at. They just didn't win them. One, they couldn't even get to play them. And then secondly, how can it be my fault that you don't play the game and that you're worse? Like I can only beat who's ahead of me. So the reason why I actually put Liquids first is there's that crazy thing of the record of how fast they won it. They just started and then won it. Like Astralis like lost a bit early and then got going and then had a space between it and then eventually won it, right? It's just that they didn't get denied, but they didn't win the 4 in a row. Then also, what's the event you cap it on? ESL won Cologne. Yeah, it's not a major in 29, but it's one of the best events. And I'll tell you what, every team wants to win ESL Cologne. People like Astralis even leveled up for that event. Fucking Vitality, Zero was having one of the best performances of his young career. Navi's still in the mix, really dangerous still. Like, that was a really big event. And to cap your Grand Slam at Cologne like that, what a fucking epic way. So I'm actually going, fuck y'all. Liquid first, Astralis second, for once in history. For once. But that's just because, by the way, if people don't know, as I said, Astralis won a million tournaments, which wasn't relevant to the Grand Slam in this case.
Yeah, no, I have the exact same ranking. Funnily enough, I think I'll give a little bit more of reasoning as to why I put FaZe lower. So yeah, it's the length that it took them to actually complete it, and there were so many scenarios where I don't even think they should have won that Pro League final. It was they didn't look that great. The last Pro League final they actually won, it was tight. Like it wasn't comfortable by any means. And of course, I mean, you can draw that comparison to like any of the tournaments they won, and that's just the FaZe way. But I think that length of time just kind of like reduces anything at that point. And then I think the devil's advocate that I could make for Astralis is that they had relatively tougher competition. I was looking at the kind of the Grand Slams that the teams that were involved at that point. Let me pull it up exactly. But like they weren't actually ahead for a little while. They had to like win a couple of tournaments. I think SK was involved at this time.
FaZe Clan.
No, not yeah. FaZe Clan as well. Fnatic had a notch. And North had a notch apparently. So I thought that there was definitely much more competition at this point. But yeah, I think in terms of Liquid and the way they did it, and especially with Cologne, it didn't feel like there was necessarily any debate between any of the other three seasons, just because, I mean, you look at the fashion that they were doing it. I mean, even just in the game itself, the micro aspects of it. I mean, they were not losing force buys ever. They were winning on Deagles, on Tech Nines. I mean, this team looked it actually felt like an indomitable team, and truly was the team of that season that deserved to win it completely and utterly. And I think Vitality did definitely give them a run for their money. I think they played them at Chicago as well, and leading up to that final, they looked pretty good, but they didn't look like any semblance of a team when they played into Liquid, just because of how insane Twist had. Twist had an insane performance in that tournament, and it just took things over. So I think that Liquid, pound for pound, I think just did so much with the little time that they had, and the fact that they just got running right out of the gates is just super impressive to me. And the kind of map rates the map win rates that they would have, and the lack of maps lost that they had throughout all of these tournaments was also just absolutely unreal. So even in the fashion that they were winning these tournaments were just completely flawless. So I think Liquid, even for me, I think I would put them over the top, even though you could make the devil's advocate that potentially the field was maybe a little bit more difficult for Astralis. But I think Liquid takes the cake for me.
I'll do the counterpoint to that, though. Here's the counterpoint to your devil's advocate, though. Team Liquid actually had to place ahead of the fucking Astralis team that we're talking about here. Literally that lineup. Now, yeah, everyone, like, this is where people don't take a position and stick with it. So you either think I am biased and there never was a Astralis and that was just like not as good events, and then they were always as good. They call them McSteel angle of like they won the two majors, so they won 3 majors in a row, so the era kept going. Well, if the era kept going, then Team Liquid won a motherfucking Grand Slam during someone else's era. So how do you like them apples? Remember when I said that like blast fucking, I can't remember which one it was, Sao Paulo or whatever, the one where they lost to Ents. When I said that ended their era, every other motherfucker like Richard Lewis now told me I'm wrong. Like, same as they tell Richard, yeah, you're wrong, everything you say is wrong. Like, they all told me I'm wrong. Well, so if I'm not right, if their era continued, then Team Liquid won their Grand Slam during an era against the greatest team of all time. So that's fucking fire. And if it was the case that they dropped off, well, here's the difference. They still did win in tournaments featuring that same lineup. Astralis won theirs against the one with Taco, not the one with Stewie. So that's just a little devil's advocate. Basically, if this was caught, I'd be like, objection, Your Honour, and then obviously they would sustain the objection, overrule or whatever. I can't remember. It's sustained, I think. Yeah, it's sustained. Right, the last question is, and I've made this one open-ended as well. Which player or teams, you can go either angle, was the biggest loser of the online era?
So I think I only picked teams for this question because I think there were so many losers that came out of this. I think I'll go with probably the most left field one. I don't know if it's left field, but Evil Geniuses was one that I had a huge issue with. They were, and I think they had just won New York. They had won a couple tournaments. The Star Series as well, right? And they had a couple top fours leading into the new year. And of course, I mean, at the start of 2020, they were having a little bit of a drop off. They lost a couple maps to, I believe, OG at that Blast Spring groups in 2020. They didn't necessarily pop off at Katowice. But regardless, I mean, there was so much promise for this lineup, and it showed that, NA had a second team. And in some ways, I mean, people were arguing that this EG could eclipse the Liquid roster at the time, and perhaps EG could be that premier NA organization. And the fact that they were pumping out so many good results, it felt like there was something in the makings here. And I mean, after the online period started, of course, Tarek's confidence kind of dropped off. He decided to leave. Breezy's confidence dropped off a cliff. He's nowhere to be seen. Still check stealing as of today. But I mean, regardless, I think that EG had still just so much capability as an NA roster. It could have completely just shaped how the region is perceived altogether, to have two rosters steadily going at the top of CS. So I'll go with EG first. I'd like to do that back and forth, that thing that we had before. I think that could work better here.
Okay. I wouldn't personally take EG. I actually think it's funny. Everyone tries to tell me this is Carrigan's career. No, it's Stanislaw's career. Stanislaw's the one that comes in and has the honeymoon period because he just takes Daps' fucking teams and then just runs it into the ground after that. Doesn't just do bad, he runs it into the ground. By the way, if people don't know, Stanislaw's the reason Nitro is the greatest NA IGL, because he just fucked up Team Liquid that hard. They were even like, you know what, dickhead? We're doing the Zeus and Navi. You just fucking chill on over here being shit, and someone else has to be the IGL because you just can't do it. So that one, I don't even give a fuck about EG. Fuck EG as a record label, as a crew. Y'all know the reference, right? So if we're going one for one, my immediate option is the Carrigan Mouse Spots lineup, because everyone remember it just went to shit. Basically, even Rops dropped his level a bit. Woxic fucking ruined his... He could have been individual, the names I picked here, because basically not only was his form shit, some of the things behind the scenes that I've hinted at, he will just never be in a top international team again. People have heard those stories. He will never be recruited for the things that happen behind the scenes. So for me, the reason why the Mouse one is a killer is because that's a team that was really solid, and it was going to be a major. There was going to be a spring major in that scenario. So I at least want to see them go to a major once they hit that form. They hit that form late in the end of the 2019, coming through to 2020. They were obviously the one where Carrigan was doing it with even lesser talent than he has now. Give me a fucking break, idiots, retconning that Frozen was some monster. No, that was like a ridiculous by committee team. Rops wasn't even Rops back then. He was just a good rifler. He'd swapped some spots on. So to me, that's one of the ones where if he'd even gone to a major and gone deep, like if he could go top four or something, dude, he'd already be like bona fide legend status already. You could already start that GOAT conversation. So Mouse is the team overall, because it took all that time and then rejigging the lineup, and then eventually even had to get Rops in the door. So 2021 was a waste as well. It took all that to finally give Carrigan this one last chance to have a real team that could win everything. Like, you can do another one then. Go on.
Yeah, I also had Mouse. I think that's the one that definitely jumped off the page because, too often I've seen people retcon that in the GOAT IGL conversation between Carrigan and Glaive, and it's just that, Carrigan has done so much with so little, and still actually did it against Astralis lineups before. I mean, you think about that EPL finals and the fact that he did it to them there. I mean, that was always just so impressive to see him actually shut down rosters like that. But the other team / player I have in mind is Fnatic and Golden in particular. Just the fact that they just won Malmo in 2019. They were coming in second in a lot of situations. I think the second at Star Series, losing to EG. They get top 4 at ECS. They lose to Liquid, the eventual champions. And then they play EPL against Mouse and come in second place there. Of course, that's Carrigan's Mouse. And then after that, I mean, they placed top 4 at Katowice in the next year. And then they were doing well in the like close qualifiers or whatever as soon as we moved over to online. But then after that, I mean, you could see the motivation drop off for so many of those LAN players, like your Flushers, like your JWs, who had so much to offer on LAN, could have that aura of fear that they could permeate on stage so often but all of that washes away when it's online, and they lose motivation. They can't get away with the plays that they were able to pull off on LAN crowd stages, and it completely fell apart, and Golden's value completely tanked after that. I mean, he attempted to try to bounce back with other rosters, but it felt like it was a little too late at that point where there was no LAN in sight. And I think Fnatic was just such a team that needed to play on LAN for them to actually prosper, and it all kind of fell apart. And perhaps Golden could have offered a lot more to maybe even international CS at that point, but it just kind of all fell for naught.
The problem I have with that particular lineup is this, which is I just don't believe the window could have lasted much longer with that lineup. Like, I actually think inevitably they would have had to make change. Like, spoiler, we've seen Brolan since. Like, he was a very young player. Like, it looked like he was actually a bit of a flash in the pan, quite frankly. Even online, he's dropped off. He has never made it back since. I don't give a fuck what people say. Like, he's never been like a legit star player in any context after that for me. So then after that, you have the angle that, like, people love to. This is why JW that one time just openly lied about what happened with Flusher and Fnatic. People just like to delete that part. I made that video about when they ran back the Dennis lineup. Flusher was shit in that team. It was one of the reasons they could never get a win. They could never do anything in the big series. And so he had like a crazy career renaissance for that last year or so. I don't think it could have lasted that much longer because that sort of player never did it off skills. He was like a good skilled player. It was the fact he was like a genius. He had like a wall hack in his brain. So like when that goes, you're nothing at that point in time. When that's what you lived and breathed off. That's like your X-Men mutant power. If you don't have it, you shower luck. You're just a normal player at that point in time. So I think they would also have been caught out eventually. The one I was going to go with is, as a player, I think it's Kenny S. Because Kenny S never got back from that. He never got into a top team again. It was a waste of time, the online period. I don't blame them for removing him when they got Nico. Look, it was stupid because there wasn't an AWPer, but he just wasn't a good player. And Kenny S.'s stars, two Feast-Off family, can't be a supportive AWPer. And also, people forget, they were in that kind of 8-tier final, the final right before we went online. That was the one before they had Nico, when they had Hunter and Nexa and Kenny S. And even though he entered the final, he was still a very strong player, go up his numbers. So if they could continue after that, like if they could have gone to a major with that team, dude, they were a dark horse. They'd have been in the mix to like maybe fluke win that or come to a final or the semis. And also, if just LAN never went away, Kenny S right now would still be playing, I'm telling you, because he would never have completely lost his feel. He didn't just have the online period where he played fuck all. He then just took like a solid year or so off Counter-Strike. He did nothing and played literally games of like Valorant on stream and just partied. Like if you ever followed his Instagram, he was just going around the world party. He even went to CS events, but just as sort of like a friend of people and with, I think, his girlfriend at the time who was like in the scene or whatever. So that was just so whack. Like essentially, online era combined with his lack of motivation killed his career. But if you know how talented this guy was, if there were still LANs, and especially the tier 2 and tier 3 LANs, he would always have had a team and a salary. Like he could have been on like your second best French team, whatever that would have been at the time. There's even a world where like he wouldn't be in a team like Vitality, but there's a world where there's still a French team. If you have Kenny S, even at 60% motivation, still fragging out at like everything except the top 10 teams, like he'd probably still have a career. So I've never like, people think Guardian already had the problems in Na'Vi before is the issue. Like, no one really give a fuck. Andy's from Slovakia, unfortunately. So Kenny S was just primed to still be a relevant player. He would still be in the mix in some category now. And maybe now is when his career would be ending. But we got robbed of a few years there.